we've got Peter Whiteman and Ian Tompkins from CCG, and we've got the Residents Action Group from Osler House. So, CCG, would you like to go first?
Yes, okay. We distributed a paper that we sent to the Essex Scrutiny Committee, which, if you're new to the subject or need a refreshing on it, sets out in some detail specifically what went on and the reasons for the change. So I'll give a bit of a high overview, but hopefully that's been a useful background for members before the meeting to understand the context. I just want to give a bit of national and local, bigger picture first of all. My role, I'm the Director of Commissioning for General Practice. And you may know, but we received the budget now since April 2017 in West Essex CCG for commissioning general practice services. And then we hold contracts with 32 practices across West Essex, and they are independent organisations. So they're not NHS bodies or employees, they are contractors. And so our job is to make sure that every patient who's living in our area and registered with the patient with the service is able to receive a high quality general practice service. That's our responsibility. We know that nationally general practice is under a lot of pressure, and 2-3 years ago it was finally picked up as a national priority, and it had a lot of lack of focus for a good 10 years nationally. And the main pressures are first of all the workload. That patients on average are seeing their doctors' surgeries more often than they used to. So the patients will go to the practice 6 times a year on average. It used to be down in the 3s and 4s, and so that is creating a very big demand on practices for appointments and to cope with that volume. We also know that in the workforce that we've got nationally the GPs are retiring sooner, and as are nurses. And that's a mixture of national changes to the pension changes for doctors in particular, but also the fact that the working day means that it's very, very challenging. So doctors can often see 40-45 people in a day of 10-minute appointments to get through lots of work, and that's been very demanding on that workforce. So that's a major national pressure, and we've seen exactly that pressure come to play in West Essex with our GP and nursing workforce. And then also nationally, we've got problems with infrastructure. Harlow's pretty well provided, to be honest, with regards to the Harlow Health Centres Trust. I think that's a really good legacy, and you just have to look at Lister Health Centre and all the leadership that's gone around that. But we still do have a couple of sites in Harlow where we need to pay attention for the long term because they're not fit for purpose. So that's a national picture, and that's been played out in West Essex. So looking to the future, what the national plan is, and it's reflected in what our plan is that what is being most successful is larger teams of doctors and nurses working together. Those are the teams that are able to be more successful to recruit, and they can be working across a number of sites. And just to give you a picture, nationally, there was last year 111 practices merged with each other in order to form bigger practices. And in the town of Peterborough, for example, half of the city's practices are all merged into one team as a way of trying to counter this workforce problem we've been looking at. The second thing is that we're looking at new roles, and now we have, so instead of a GP doing most of the work, increasingly nurses are doing the work, pharmacists are seeing patients, or paramedics, and it's all about trying to find a way to manage the pressure so that we can get appointments for those people who need to see a GP. We'll also need to direct patients to alternatives for their GP and self-care. And all of this just lays the context for what we're trying to contract from general practice. We had an example in Osler House, and it was one of 3 surgeries in West Essex who said to us, the provider said, I can't do this anymore, and handed the contract back to us in October, back in 2017. And so our responsibility then was to, okay, what do we do? How do we provide a service for these patients? And we looked at the different options. First of all, we spoke to the existing practice to say, well, can we convince you to stay? And we weren't successful doing that. We then spoke to the other practices in the town to to say, could you run a branch surgery here? And we had an offer from the council about redeveloping facilities, and we weren't able to achieve that with the local practices. And then we looked at the options and we decided to disperse the list, i.e. which means to ask people to register with another practice in the town. And we're talking around 3,200 people were registered with the practice of 90-odd thousand patients in Harlow. And we're lucky in Harlow because it's a relatively dense population compared to other areas we commissioned for, that there were options for patients within a mile or within 2 miles. All of those practices had their lists open to receive patients. So we took the decision to disperse the list. And again, looking at the national picture, there were 57 practices last year, 17-18, who were dispersed. Exactly the same thing happened in other parts of the UK. And the average size of those practices was 3,600. So this is a common picture that small surgeries are struggling to recruit, and that's what leads to them having to close or hand back to us the service. So from our point of view, we took this decision. We appreciate that this was a very contentious issue for residents, and we communicated the decision to residents. We didn't have a consultation process because we didn't really have any options to consult on that we felt could achieve the objectives, and we needed to realise quickly a service before the contractor left that was going to be safe for patients to attend to. So we ran a dispersal process and contacted patients, gave them some information to choose which surgery to register with. If they didn't choose in a certain time, we then wrote to the patient second time to say, please, we are now allocating you to this practice and distributing amongst the nearby surgeries. And then, but the patients still retain the right, after that process is completed, to change their registration. And since then we've had, which is common in the situation, a few patients have then moved on to another practice after their practice that they were allocated to. So that's been our process. We accept that there was a communication with counsellors which came a couple of days after the patients were notified, which was not our intention. We have a third party who does all the administration, all the letters with patients, and that went out earlier than we contracted with them to do so. And we apologise for that, and we would make sure that didn't happen again in the future. But it's also identified for us as a CCG, and I think the council, the meetings we've had, that we need to be talking more, looking ahead to what the issues are in general practice at Harlow, because it's an ongoing topic for us, as you must find with other council services. How do we plan for the future of the town, the infrastructure for all the growth that's coming? And just since January, we've had another 1,000 people have registered in practice at Harlow, so we need to keep finding ways to accommodate those extra patients in the practices. And largely our strategy is to support the existing surgery we've got, to build out, to cope with that extra capacity. So we want to have that strategic conversation with the council to make sure that we're planning as best as we can. And Jane and I have had a couple of meetings and some other councillors around what infrastructure could support that, help us cope with the growth. So hope that's helpful. Paint the picture, and there's obviously lots more detail about the Osler circumstance specifically, but hopefully that puts it into the context of what we were looking to achieve.
The reason that you were invited here tonight was that when this was raised at a previous scrutiny, which meaning all the councillors, if I remember correctly, were concerned about lack of notice and the problems it was going to cause residents. Our MP complained about it, so we thought it best for you to come and explain the situation. And that leads into our Osler House Action Group to explain what problems they had and the patients of that surgery had coping with the closure. It wasn't a case of, say, you come in here and we have a go at you and throw bums at you. It's an understanding of what had happened and it not happening again. So, who would like to speak on behalf of the
Chairman, as part of the action group, can I go first as a councillor in that ward? Would that be okay with the rest of the action group and the
other councillors are happy with that? Yeah?
Okay. I do have to go back. I am a councillor in Harlow Common Ward, which Osler House is within the realm of. The first I knew about this was when I received a letter on the 21st of February as a patient informing me that Osler House was going to be closing and that I had a list of other GP surgeries I would be able to go to. Now, as a counsellor for that ward, Osler House has been threatened twice before, and we have saved it twice before. The way we did that was to get together with, as it was at the time, the primary care and different parties. We took about 9 months to do that, and we got there, and we saved it twice. Now, I would have thought that the least that could have happened by West Essex was that they contacted the local councillors and the council to do exactly what I've just described, to get round the table so that we could find a solution to the situation. If there was none, it wouldn't have happened. But we weren't given that opportunity, because I was the first one that I'm aware of that actually found out as a patient. I did not find out as a counsellor. I've had patients coming to me since then on a constant level saying, what's happened to Osler? Why haven't we got it back? And I certainly didn't get a letter as a counsellor 2 days after everybody else got one. I never got that. So I'm extremely concerned that we were not given that opportunity as a council and councillors to get involved with West Essex, to go through this and see if we could have got a different picture that's now come out of this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor. Who else?
Yes, my name's Jane Chifrell. I've been a resident. I was actually delivered by Dr. Merrick in 1955, so I'm a very big part of Osler. As many of you know, Potter Street has quite a high level of elderly people. The upper age group at Osler was between 59 years and 100 years old. Admittedly, the West Essex CCG said that our nearest surgery was 0.9 miles from Potter Street, which was Church Langley. But in actual fact, if you can't drive or you're not able to afford a taxi, to reach Church Langley from Potter Street is a 7-mile journey, because it's 2 bus rides. You have to come into Harlow first and then go back to Church Langley on the bus. If you're not feeling very well, and you know, maybe a retired person who doesn't want to have to face this journey, one of the things that we are finding is that some people are just not bothering to go to the doctor. They're feeling unwell, but they just can't face the journey. During the summer, it's not been too bad, but now we face cold weather, bitter winds, standing at bus stops, bus passes that don't function after 9:30 in the morning, so elderly will have to find their bus fares. And as an example, for the last 2 days, we haven't been able to get in or out of Potter Street because Potter Street's been gridlocked. So if you've waited 10, maybe days, maybe 2 weeks for your doctor's appointment, and on that particular morning, when you need to have an important medication review, you can't get there, not because you don't want to, but because you can't get out of Potter Street. That was why Osler was always there. And this is what people need, and this is what people miss. Every hat you've got, Bush Fair, the Stowe, Staple Tyre, they've all got their own surgeries. And we are the furthest out on the town. And in reference to Councillor Charles, who said, we do have people that need mental health care in Potter Street, who are outpatients, who get confused with all the different buses they need to catch. And I do feel that all ward councillors should actually hold an open afternoon or an open day where patients can freely go and discuss the problems that they are having with their ward councillors. Because I don't think anybody here realises the impact that the closure of Osler has had on this community.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, one of the reasons was...
What your name is, please?
Sorry, Michael, I'm the chairman of the Residents' Forum. One of the reasons cited was that the practice group found that it was not viable to run the surgery. Earlier in 2017, two members of Essex Care Group, Dr. Gerlis and Tracy Mandy, met with the practice group to discuss funding arrangements. I don't know the exact date in 2017, but then it was viable. Somewhere along the line it became non-viable, and we believe it was because Harlow Healthcare Trust stopped the practice group from running a different surgery. Apparently it wasn't authorised by Harlow Healthcare Trust, so that was shut. So the opportunity of making more money in that particular surgery was taken away. Now the oddity is that we have something which is not financial but viable, but on transferring the services to other surgeries, there was a suggestion that an extra premium would be paid to those surgeries for the inconvenience it was going to be for taking on those patients. So it follows sort of thing, if you can't give extra money to the group which was already running it, how come you can give money to other surgeries to run? The other thing which came up was the fact that we were such a small surgery of 3,300 and something patients, it wouldn't be viable to put it out for contract because it wouldn't be acceptable. Which then raises another question. On the 31st of May, as a recorded date in the papers I have, Steeple Bumstead, who has 1,000 patients less than Potter Street, was allowed to put it out for tender. Now, it's not viable for someone who's got 3,344 patients. How come it now becomes viable for another small surgery? If the money is there for one, it should have been there for Osler House. And I find it really, really odd that for some surgeries it's available, but for Osler House it wasn't. There was no discussion or minimal discussion between the doctors. We have emails which run from approximately early December into early January discussing the situation, where we were told that discussions went on for 3 months, where they certainly didn't. As I said, what worries me was the fact that one lot could. The other was in conflict with Hamilton and Ross practice, where the sitting locum is also the chairman of the West Essex group. There's a conflict of interest there when they were offering to take 800 to 1,000 patients on. So 1,250 were going to be delivered to Hamilton practice. 800 to 1,000 was going to go to the Ross practice. That was found to be a conflict of interest and didn't take place. As I said, the financial part of the equation is totally wrong.
What I'd just like to mention, I'm Vice Chairman of the Residents' Forum. What we've done here, we've got 3 people. One who's looking after the side of what's happened to the community in general. Colin's looking after the financial side and has been dealing with people like Essex, equivalent to the scrutiny committee. So we've got lots of documentation to support everything that we say tonight. So if anyone from the council or the CCG needs to look at it, we can provide copies of that.
Okay, I'll allow the CCG to come back to us in a minute. Can I take your name?
My name's Kevin Tucker.
Okay.
And I'm Vice Chair of the Residents Group.
Are there
I've
any-
got 4 different sections to cover, and they're going to be more on the legal side, because one of the major things that we feel has been a problem is the lack of consultation.
All
And
right.
that lack of consultation specifically applies to the council, because as we're all well aware, the council are quite good at being able to keep confidences, so that if the CCG were interested in talking to anyone, then they could have talked to the council and something could perhaps have been worked out. But what we've got from the legal side of things, it's going to be a little bit tedious, I'm afraid, but we have got a letter well actually a set of minutes which go to the West Essex Primary Care Commissioning Committee, and that's on the 21st of March 2018. And what I'm trying to do is to run through the system that the CCG should have followed but didn't. So 21st of March, the closure of Osler House was the 30th of April. One of the first things that is said in these minutes is there has been a strong adverse reaction from both the patients and other stakeholders. Both patients and local councillors are being very vocal about the depletion of local services for residents and the short notice in which they have been informed about this. Patients are also concerned that it's putting additional pressure on other local practices that are perceived as being already oversubscribed. So that's part of the problem. What we also have within these same minutes is advice to the CCG. NHS England have a process for this dispersal which should be followed as outlined in the policy guidance manual. So I went to the policy guidance manual, and what we got from that is a long list of things of which the CCG did not follow. So we have, I don't know if you want to keep track of this one, under section 14Z2 of the National Health Service Act 2006, CCGs have a legal duty to secure that individuals to whom the services are being or may be provided are involved in the planning of the commissioning arrangements by the group, the development and consideration of proposals by the group for changes in the commissioning arrangements, and the decisions of the group affecting the operation of the commissioning arrangements, where the implementation of the decisions would, if made, have such an impact. It says, impact on services, in such circumstances, it is likely that the legal duty to involve applies. There was no involvement with the council, there was no involvement with the patient groups. The only involvement appears to have been with the practice, and this is the confusing part, a company called The Practice, who are the practice, and the local practices. There was discussion with them, but not with the people it was directly affecting. Their failure to brief the local MP, they sent a letter on the 5th of March, which says, I did apologise for not briefing you in advance of the letter sent to patients. We recognise this put you in a difficult position. Again, I'm sorry for this, and we're working to ensure it will not happen in the future. So that's good. They got it wrong once. Never mind, we'll apologise, that's fine. But what they should have done, because there was a service change and there was a description of this, another National Health Service Act 2006, it sets out the legislative framework for public involvement, sections 13Q, NHS England, 14Z2, which applies specifically to CCGs, and 242, the NHS trusts and FTs. Consultation with local authorities is provided for in the local authority, public health and wellbeing boards and health scrutiny regulations, 2013, the S24 regulations. So I can give you that extra information if you need that. But they haven't done it. It says, broadly speaking, service change is any change to the provision of NHS services. Change of site with its consequent impact on patient, relative and visitor travel times, which we've already talked about, the fact there is no transport. It's a 7-mile trip to a 0.9-mile away surgery. This would normally be a substantial change and would therefore trigger the duty to consult the local authority, which was not done, and would be likely to require public consultation, which was not done. There are also 4 tests of service changes and various things like that. So that's the general side of that. This is what was suggested by, sorry, the acronym, where are we again? I'll find the right page. Like I say, we've got loads of documentation for this. Page 16.
Okay, I think you've made it for me.
Okay. Anyway, anyway, they haven't done what they should have done. So that's from the guidance they were given. We go for that. There were incorrect assumptions made. These involved transport. They involved costs. We also had a very good comment about locums, which I would like to mention, because the chair of the CCG is actually, yours at the time, a locum, the Ross practice. And in the West Essex Clinical Commissioning Group document, which I have a copy of here, it says, for practices to provide services within the standard NHS funding level, they need to have a large enough registered population, 6,000 to 7,000 patients, and employ long-term staff at standard NHS pay rates. i.e. not highly paid locums, which Osler House has had to employ. Dr. Rob Gurlis is a highly paid locum at Ross, and he was very good at a meeting that we had where he said, well, locums just aren't really worth having. So it was almost like he was shooting himself in the foot. And I've got minutes from that meeting, we have witnesses to that. We've also got that providers have told us if the CCG were to run a procurement, they would not bid for a service of the size of Osler House. It says here 3,300, it was 3,347. That has risen from 2,500 when it was first taken over to 3,100, and as has been mentioned by Peter, another 1,000 people have been allocated within Harlow. And because we have New Hall 2, there will be more people there. They don't have a surgery on site. The Gilded Way site has no surgery and has no plans for a surgery. Everything else was creaking. It's now getting close to busting. There were inappropriate contacts made. These were to the various practices around the town, again, before anyone spoke to the councillors or to the patients. And finally, I'm going to mention the correct contact, which was, first correct contact was with the councillors on, I believe it was, 11th of March. So the place, Osler House, was going to close on the 30th of April, and the first meeting that our ward councillors had was on the 11th of March, where the CCG stated they have a board meeting next week where a couple of suggestions that have been given at this meeting will be put forward and they will get back to us. I don't know if that ever happened, but since they waited until March to do that, and they've already known since the 31st of October last year that the practice were closing, because I got a copy of their letter where they said we're going to cease. It's just they had the time to tell us. Why didn't they? Okay. So really what we want is for everything that we should have had in the past. Discussions with the council, consultation with the patients. I'm not saying that we're expecting Osler House to come back, but we certainly want to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen again within the town, because Sydenham House is smaller, Barber Castle is smaller. One of the other reasons that we had problems was because Harlow Healthcare Trust said that they couldn't afford the maintenance or the security of Osler House, but they didn't justify or quantify what those requirements were. And it would have been nice to see Carol Syson here as the Chief Executive of HHCT, but there were combinations of factors which have caused this to happen.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joel, would you...
Sorry, it's just a quick one, just so I'm clear. Sorry, it's Kevin, is it?
Yeah.
Which specific legislation were you quoting from at the beginning? Just so I'm crystal clear.
Right.
What was the specific act?
This is the NHS Health Act. Let me just find what page, 18. And this is the edited highlights of what we've discovered.
Just a specific legislation.
Yeah. Right. The National Health Service Act 2006. Yeah, we can go that far, but we've got three sections of that.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Yeah, so
2006.
the specific one that we're talking about is 14Z2, and that relates to CCGs.
Fine, got it. Okay, sorry.
Anything else?
Oh, well, the opening questions.
I think it's appropriate if councillors want to say anything now, then we invite our colleagues from CCG to respond to what they've heard tonight, to make it more viable.
I do have questions, but I was going to defer to Maggie first because she's the ward councillor. I do have questions, but I thought it would only right that if Maggie wanted to ask questions first.
Well, mine, as I said at the beginning, was why, as ward councillors, that something this major for our population of ageing people and families, were we not given the courtesy of an informed way before it happened? And I was notified by that letter. We are in, and as it's been quoted as well, we are in the business of confidentiality in this council, and we weren't given that. We would have kept it if we had to, we wouldn't have given it to the residents unless we knew that we were going to be allowed to. We would have done it behind closed doors if we had to, but we weren't given that opportunity. And that's what makes me extremely frustrated, that we are, as partners in the health and wellbeing of West Essex, because you're on that list, you were not dealing with one of your partners over such a major situation for one of the wards of this town. And that does not bode well for how things are going. And I was quite ashamed of the situation that we found ourselves in from your aspect.
Joe, would you like to come in now?
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of questions to the West Essex CCG. First of all, thank you for coming. I'm grateful for the forward note before tonight. I take a specific interest in these issues because of my professional background. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first question I have. Just want to look at the total funding West Essex CCG has. My understanding is that in the 18-19 financial year, you had a budget increase of around about 3% on 16 and 17. Is that correct overall?
When I would refer to whatever's in our documents, and I'm not the finance director of the CCG, will be correct.
Okay.
It's of that order.
Because my understanding.
Copy of the council report.
Yeah, I mean, I took it from. So I'm of the understanding that in the 17-18 budget, you had a budget of 382.6 million, a 2.96% funding increase on 16 and 17.
2017-18. And that,
And
Mr.
then-
Regan just have to but that does
and then-
not include the primary care budget. So there's another 40 odd million that we have for the primary care we have responsibility is April 17. But yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. So there was, my understanding is there was a funding increase. Clearly, the Health and Social Care Act 2012 governs the principles for clinical commissioning groups. And I just want, from your perspective, to understand how you believe you fulfilled the spirit of that act in terms of your actions on Osler House. Clearly, you have a primary role for allocating GP provision, and there are specific duties in the Act that you follow. Are you content that you followed the spirit and the intent of the Act as it's laid down in 2012?
Okay. Because there's so much, I don't know, order you want to take responses to take this question
You're
first.
quite welcome to take it now.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know what other people want to speak. But
Yeah, so there's just a lot of things been said, isn't there? Something.
Yeah.
Okay. So the process that we have followed here is exactly the same process that we followed for surgery in Waltham Abbey, which closed at the same time, or about a month apart, and we dispersed the list. The same for Ongar Health Surgery, which was 12 months previous. It's been the same for Trapsill Surgery in Loughton. It's been the same for the equivalent smaller practices that has happened to in other parts of Essex, so those examples you can come up with. This is how the NHS does this particular piece of business, and we do it very carefully in the context of the acts that have been quoted with regards to the responsibilities of whoever the primary care commissioner is. In West Essex it's us, the CCG, in other parts it's NHS England. Whoever the commissioning body is, this is the process that we follow. And it is, we've been very careful to make sure that we've adhered to that. So I think with regards to communication and consultation, so the suggestions that we've followed haven't followed our duty. That is not what we've done. We've followed the same process as is the case law about how this business is done. And our contact with the started with the contact with the original provider and with the other two local practices was to say, because the critical thing is to hold on, if we can, is to hold on to the staff in the practice. And once these things break into public experiences, that immediately affects patient anxiety goes through the roof, staff anxiety goes through the roof. It's a very volatile situation. So our first action is to try to discreetly talk to the existing local providers to see if we can't secure this ongoing service from this existing location. And and we were sadly unable to do that. We thought at various points we would, but we weren't able to, which just got us to January, and that was when the consultation process began, and the change process began. So that's on that specific question. I've said so many other things. Do you have anything else to come back on?
No, I've got a few questions.
That's fine.
That's okay. The next question I have, it's already been alluded to by a number of people tonight, and it's the demographics of all this. I mean, I've quoted this time and time again, Harlow has the highest proportion of 90-year-olds in the country, outside of London. We have an ageing population. What I want to understand, when you came to make this decision, did you take into account the demographics specifically in Harlow Common as part of your decision-making process?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And we know that many of the older residents of Potter Street area were not registered, had already decided not to register with this practice. So when you looked at the percentage of the list size that was with Potter Street, it was one of the younger average lists in the area. Yeah? So that patients were already accessing other surgeries as they're able to, and that's one of the strengths of Harlow, is that people sit in 3, 4, 5 surgeries catchments and can choose which surgery they're registered with. So we specifically took account of that. And another further example of that is that there's a care home for people with a learning disability. We specifically secured support for them, and I think better support for them, because Osler House would never care for them the way we wanted them to. We got agreed a contract with Church Langley, we offered that same contract to them. So I think for the demographics of that specific care home, they are having a better experience. And then for the 90-year-olds, and obviously that comment about age applies to the whole of Harlow.
It does.
And that accessibility issue applies to the whole of Harlow. If you're not haven't got a surgery next door, you've got to find a way of getting to one. And that is actually the issue for us for the whole of Harlow. How do we get people on a surgery at everyone's doorstep? How do we help people to get into those facilities? We have home visiting services for particular patients when that's required. And that is part of our future demand, is how do we, that's why we've recruited a paramedic to work across Harlow, specifically to target people who are housebound and need extra primary care. So we're not in the business of closing surgeries, we're in the business of trying to provide healthcare, trying to get a model that can work for the town.
That nicely leads on to my next question. One of the main criticisms that came up time and time again was, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a lack of a concerted effort to register people in Harlow Common and funding allocated towards actively, proactively getting people registered in Harlow Common. And that's illustrated in the numbers actually that you saw and the demographics that you saw. When was the last time that Osler House, before it closed, conducted a proactive push to register people in the Harlow Common area? You may not know it now.
I mean, every surgery in Harlow will be everyone have an open list. Well, they have an open list for a long time in Harlow, which means you can choose to register there. Some practices, when they are really up against it, the workforce close their lists for a short period until they've gone up. So everyone's got an open list. I think promotion is something that surgery is always doing. I couldn't tell you what Osler House is doing. What is important to know in terms of the finance is that as soon as I go, any one of us goes and registers with the surgery next door or somewhere else, we take our NHS budget with us, and it's £100 or whatever it is that goes with that patient to that surgery, from which they then need to bring in staff to look after that patient. So that's the way the NHS budget works. And there is and I've picked this question up as part of some things Colin was saying. The amount of money that we have available for primary care is now a standard national price, and that is new. And that came into effect, mostly, it's still being tapered in, but mostly in last April. That's one of the triggers as to why we had 3 surgeries who had got their contracts back. And that's because their prices were pieces of history, and they were much, much higher per patient. And it was that transition from that very high price, when nationally everyone was required to pay the same price, that was what led to this company saying, well, if you're not going to pay me this premium, we're not going to stay any longer. We said, well, we'll offer you to pay the same price everybody else gets. And that money is what all this, where every patient's gone, that same budget, no more, no less, is what's gone to Church Langley, to Hamilton, to Sydenham, to Liston, to Ross, where those patients are registered. So it's the same amount as a standard price.
Then the final future question for is clearly the government's identified that it would do a 10-year joint workforce strategy for health and social care. I suspect West Essex CCG is very keen to respond to that. I was wondering if I could be cheeky and ask you specifically what impacts you see in the future for Harlow, because no one here wants to see any other GP closures, and it would be better for the West Essex CCG to be more open and communicate with leaders in Harlow Council so that we can work together on a cross-party basis to try and bring these issues head on. So what do you see as the specific workforce challenges, particularly here in Harlow?
I mean, I think Harlow has an issue that is quite close to London, so all of the workforce are probably less so than Epping actually, but it's just a tube ride away. At least the tube doesn't come to Harlow, because that's terrible. That's a parochial thing for us, because we have a problem in Epping of nurses can get better off if they get on the tube. So there is proximity to London is a pressure. I think but at the end of the day, what partners and doctors are choosing, they want to work in a stable workforce. And so what we're working with our practices to do is to create that stable workforce. And one of the ways of doing that is to get them to not. They've all often historically worked as 10 separate businesses in town, and they may be practice splits because people didn't get on. That's how general practice worked in the past. So one of the things we're doing is to try to get them to work as groups of 3s and 4s. And so if a practice has a problem with workforce, then the neighbouring surgery might help them. So I think Harlow faces the same problems as everybody else. What we're trying to do as a CCG is to help them to work together. And then we're also trying to link them up to the new medical school in Chelmsford, which will turn out GPs. We're trying to make sure practices are training practices. We've got there's lots of offers for newly qualified doctors to try to get them to stay in Harlow. That's the thing we're trying to do. And then we're trying to attract paramedics into the area, nurses into the area. It's our number one, because everything comes from the clinical staff that you've got. Clinical staff haven't got a service, we have to attract them in. And they want to have a stable, and they have larger teams, which is what gives us to it.
I mean, I would just end by saying, all I hope in the future, and this is, you've got to understand, we all find this a terrible decision.
Yeah.
Is that when you identify problems, you flag them, you work with not just community leaders here, but residents as well, because we cannot have another situation like this ever happening again. Sorry, take a question.
Councillor Benson, do you want to say anything?
I mean, obviously echo what Councillor Charles says at the end. I mean, I feel, for all the councillors around the room, you all want to local politics for the same reason, that we want to actually make a difference. I think it's frustrating, and maybe said the best, that actually we kind of feel quite powerless in this situation, that this decision has been made, and we feel there's sort of a lack of communication, a lack of consultation. So I echo what you said there. I think the question would be, you spoke about the age profile of that particular area, and something that Lady mentioned earlier, which I think is really important, having driven over work today, is actually the geographical location of Potter Street. You're right, I think Potter Street very much becomes a bit of an island. You are, yeah. And having, I drive to work and going that way sometimes, I avoid Potter Street frankly, because it's a real issue. So that's something I asked the CCG really. And I appreciate that there may have been nothing that we as a councillors could have done, but it feels frustrating from my point of view, and kind of what Maggie was saying, that we weren't given the opportunity to at least try and do something. But I mean, the main point really, is how, as Councillor Charles has kind of said, how do we move forward, and how do we stop this happening again? Part of the things you said there was about, there'll be the same pressures in terms of recruitment which you spoke about. You also spoke about financing. Finance is a bit like a school. You get finance for how many students you get. You get finance for how many patients you've got. So how do we ensure this doesn't happen again? Because obviously, you close a surgery, that's going to add added pressure to the whole Harlow. And we are at a point. I think you mentioned it, Kevin, that actually we're at a breaking point already. So it's how we work with you. And I just would make a request, the same as Councillor Charles really that, you know, moving forward from this, that you can make a sort of guarantee that actually, if we've got an issue with a surgery in future, that you will be very open and work with us from the start really, because, you know, then maybe we can do something to avoid it.
Any other councillors?
Well, I just want to say, one of the reasons so few people in the Potter Street area go to Osler House is its dreadful reputation. I mean, I'm one of those people. I live just off Potter Street, but I go to Osler House partly because I went there where I live, because I live somewhere else initially, but I never transferred because of the appalling reputation that Osler House had for troubles, for missed appointments, cancelled appointments, difficulty in ever reaching them by phone and so on, whereas Lister House was very good. So I say to them, if only more effort had been made to improve Osler, more people would have gone in and it would have been viable.
Could I just comment on that? There was
Very quickly, because we've got...
well, I can do quickly as well.
Yeah.
There was a survey done by the NHS for people's opinions on the service at Osler House. Initially that came out as very bad. They actually made a mistake in their calculations and it was better than it said. I think it actually ended up as good. But what has happened is because, as I mentioned before about HHCT, a lack of investment from themselves and a lack of flexibility to allow different clinics to open, because there was an offer of a diabetic clinic. There were other clinics as well that were possible, and it was almost as though, I don't want to say it, but HHCT seemed to not want Osler to survive. And so they have turned up with various things that have been more of a hindrance than help.
I'll just make a few comments as a local councillor as well. People have told me that they've had problems getting to other surgeries. It's been highlighted a 7-mile journey to get to Church Langley, which I understand is quite full up anyway. Didn't really want any more patients. The waiting times on the other surgeries now, I go to the Hamilton practice. I try not to go to doctors very often, but sometimes I have to. And to get an appointment, there's quite a waiting list, so that must have added to that. And I think people's concerns is that this happened with Osler House. I think people's concern is what happens in the future, because there was rumours about Sydenham House closing, Nutfield House closing, and we thought, what's going to happen here? So I think people want some reassurance is that they're going to have health provision in the future.
Can I ask a question of Peter, please?
And then we're going to have to move on.
It's very, very brief. Kevin already brought up the legal side of it, but it should have gone before the scrutiny board. I wonder if you could tell me, Peter, when you actually put it before the scrutiny board, Essex County Council.
So that's in the 26th of February. I don't know if you've got the. It was in the the Essex County Council paper. That was.
Yeah, originally on the 2nd of February, you asked the scrutiny board for information of what you should do, in particular concerning consultation requirements for the Osler House surgery, and you was asked then to put in a business plan, which you provided on the 26th of February, which was after you'd issued the notice of closure. So, I'm just saying that you were doing it all in hindsight. You didn't follow the guidelines which were laid down, which you should have started following early in the year. You didn't do it until the 2nd of February, when you was asked to write in again. So when you're saying that you followed the legal requirements, I can't see how you did.
Okay, we need to move on now. Would you like the right to reply to the comments that have been made tonight?
I think there's a lot that's been said that from my point of view is not correct, and it took me a long time to go through some of the things that have been said that I would not agree with. I think you've got the whole night going down some of that. I think the couple of things I wanted to get across was in terms of capacity. Look at Lister House, and that's one of our in terms of our strategy for the future, looking ahead. We need that surgery is sized for a much larger population it's currently got, and is already we see an official opening on Friday. That's what the future looks like. And I want to reassure members that we're working with surgery teams like Old Harlow Health Centre to say, so how can they grow their sites? And our strategy is to grow those sites. And we need support with councillors around transport to access those sites effectively. I think with regards to the working together, I mean, Ian may want to say this, I think we would hold our hands up and say there's lots of lessons learned. The information is highly sensitive around practice vulnerabilities, because if you're a doctor looking for a surgery, as soon as there's any sense about viability of surgery, you're not going to go there, and it becomes very quickly a snowball effect. So we have to be, it is highly sensitive information, and we've got experience of that elsewhere where you have to be really careful about how you handle information, because sometimes a surgery can turn the corner, sometimes it doesn't. So I think in terms of our future dialogue, the confidentiality and that delicateness of surgeries is absolutely paramount. But I think there is space, absolutely, for a strategic conversation, a cross-party conversation to say, we're going to keep getting another 1,200 residents per year. That's going to just keep going for 10, 15 years. And we need to collaborate on our strategy around where those sites are and what the infrastructure is that gets patients to those sites. And also, I think it's probably the same for council services. We probably will never have enough appointments for everybody to see their GP when they want to for every health condition. So any collaboration, you must have that process in your services as we do this with social services. We need to help people to be happy with telephone advice, be more confident in self-care, carers to look after them. It has to be a collaboration, because we just don't have enough hours in the day. We can't work our differently. Sometimes we've got harder to get through all of those appointments. So we've got to be thinking about that model. And we gave this example, Essex County Council, scrutiny were there on bigger primary care things last week. In Ireland, people consult with their doctor 3 times a year with the same health outcomes. We consult our doctors 6 times a year in England, and that's something we need to work at about how people access services, because otherwise we just keep running this machine the same way faster, and that just turns the staff off to retire early and to leave. So that's something we'll be careful of. But we've taken a lot of comments about the relationship, and that's something that Ian corporately is helping us to put right.
Yeah, my name's Ian Tompkins. I'm relatively new, and I've only been on the scene locally here since May. So obviously, what's happened before, Peter's already spoken about that. My job at the moment is to lead on some of the support services in the CCG, the back office like HR and so on, but also including communications and engagement. It's something I've done for over 40 years, as you can probably tell by the look of me. But it's what Peter's already spoken about, some of the wider challenges, obviously the specific issues relating to Osler House, but wider challenges as well in terms of workforce, and I echo Peter's comments in terms of as soon as word spreads, it has quite a critical effect and impact on workforce and attracting people in. My most recent job's been in East London, where I've bridged the gap between 7 CCGs, 5 provider trusts and 8 local authorities. Most of my 40 years in communications engagement, a lot of it has been in local government, so I fully understand where everybody's coming from. While we can't fix some of the wider issues, what we can fix and do a lot better here is communications, engagement and networking. And as often, in my experience, it's not so much what you do when something's about to happen or when it's happened, in terms of crisis communications as we call it, it's what you do in between. And there's a lot of ground we can cover to improve the relationship between the NHS, between the CCG and also the hospital trust and so on. It's not just about the CCG as I've seen here. With the district councils, the county council and so on. It's about what we can do in between, and I've already met with officers in this council and with others about starting to build that relationship, develop it, get an ongoing dialogue. I'll quite often come to meetings and sit at the back of it at numerous health and wellbeing boards and scrutinies, even if they're not on the agenda, because it's an opportunity just to find out what's going on a wider front, because protecting our health and care services isn't just about treating patients, it's looking at some of the wider determinants, the longer term around prevention, the impact of employment, housing, transport and so on. What we want to do, or what we need to do, is build some shared work together to come up with some shared solutions, particularly in relation, I think one of my pet subject is around signposting, so that people know where to go. As we all know, the NHS can be quite difficult to understand. There's a lot of acronyms involved and people don't understand it, and particularly where we've got demographic change, and that is coming this way out of London, where we've got communities that just do not understand what GPs are, what the NHS is at all. If they've got an earache or something like that, they'll just rock up at A&E. So we've got to look at how we can point people in the right direction so they get the quickest and best possible care. We also need, as I've already just hinted at, to talk in plain language. We also, a piece of work we're doing right now in the CCG, intense piece of work, is around just mapping what all the communities and networks and groups are in the area. And also the patient groups. We're talking with the Harlow District Patient Forum, how we can widen that. We've got a session coming up next week, 1st of November, with the voluntary sector, with Rainbow Service. We've got 30, 40 voluntary sector groups coming in, because they've all got very good, strong networks that we can connect with. It's about consulting with a small c, because there's a difference between consulting with a small c and formal consultation. But at the end of the day, it's about talking to people and involving people in what we want to do, and what options there are that we can then work together to improve, whether it be exploring transport connections. I've worked just come out of East London, where we did work together with local authorities and got buses rerouted to provide a better service at Queen's Hospital, for instance. So there are a whole range of solutions where we do need to work together related to finance, estates. Prevention is a massive thing, it's a long haul, and that obviously involves engaging with not just patients, but with the people that are fortunate enough to be healthy, because at some point, undoubtedly, they will call on health and care services. So we need to talk to them and identify the best way to get the key messages across that we all face in terms of the impact on services. So kind of watch the spaces, and there's a lot of active work that I'm focusing on at the moment to hopefully put right some of the problems that revolve around communication and information.
Okay, well, a report on this meeting will go to our cabinet and then probably to council. I think it's been good tonight where we've had representatives from the Osler House Action Group explain the problems that they've encountered and what they felt about what CCG did. You've had the opportunity to voice your opinion on the way forward that you want to do. So I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you for your attendance.
Excuse me, on behalf of our group, could I just say thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to put forward our views as well. Thank you once again to put up with us.